Welcome to SlamBall Nation, the nation of SlamBall. That's right, SlamBall gathers here, and we're here to podcast with you and discuss the single greatest sport in the world. I'm your co-host, Brendan Kirsch, head coach of SlamBall's Mob, the undefeated, undisputed, 18-0 world champion Mob. Shout out to Cam Horton, Darius Clark, Gage Smith, Brandon Smith, Cam Hollins, Justin Holloway, Deontay Bird. You are all world champions. Congratulations. I'm also joined by my co-host and co-head coach of the Buzzsaw, Hernando Planells Jr. Hernando.
That's right. I am channeling my inner Deion Sanders. So don't come at me that I wasn't raised right because I'm wearing sunglasses and a hat on today's podcast. And I got a little bling today. This is not a championship. And granted, I'm not going to list all my Buzzsaw players. Y'all know who you are. I love you. You're the best. Let's go. We're coming back. We're coming back. Anyways, but wait a second. I've noticed something here on Coach Kirsch. That shiny dome, which I have, and now you have. You look amazing, Coach.
Coach, we were talking about it on episode 1, SlamBall Nation episode 1. We were talking about how beautiful bald is. We were talking about, I think you mentioned how I had 6 hairs left and it was like wheat blowing in the wind. I'm sure that was you. But I looked at my good friend, my co-head coach, Hernando Planells. I was like, this is a very handsome gentleman. So I decided to rip off the Band-Aid, shave it, just do it. And listen, I'm free. The wind is blowing in my follicles. It's so freeing and glorious. And I did not know this. For anybody who's thinking about shaving their head, you are instantly 267% stronger and 126% sexier. So those are facts, and you can't argue with facts.
Faster, aerodynamic. When we're back on the SlamBall court and you do your jumps all around, you're going to see that you're going to be like, I feel more crisp. Like I am jumping with the speed and precision that is way above any SlamBall coach.
Z-cut effectiveness. I mean, there's not as much drag bringing us down on Z-cut, so it's going to be huge.
That's
huge.
Right.
I love it, Coach. Right. Well, listen, here's what we're going to run down today. We're going to run down training camp. Going to talk a little bit about that. We're going to run down draft preparation. What did that look like from a coaching perspective, a player perspective? We're going to talk rivalries, old and new. Are some of the old rivalries dead? Are new ones brewing? I think they are. 4-point line. We're going to talk about the 4-point line. Is it a great idea? Spoiler alert, no. And we're going to talk about league stats and leaders. So we're going to dive into all that. We're going to start right now with training camp. Coach, not all of our listeners were with us during training camp. Not all of our listeners are inside SlamBall podcasters like we are. Paint us a picture of training camp.
Well, I mean, training camp, first of all, it began in a warehouse. And it was almost like deja vu because it was in a warehouse like 20 years ago when we first started, when we both had a full head of hair, right? But now we're back in the warehouse. We're in Las Vegas where people go to die and gamble. But we didn't. We came to coach SlamBall, and it was like training camp. You got all these guys. They didn't know what's happening. They got the invite to be top 24, right? So we had top 24. They came in. They had to learn the force of the tramp, and Coach Stanley Fletcher showed them the way. He had a great practice plan together. All of a sudden, you and I hadn't seen each other in years. We saw each other, saw former players all over the place. And may I remind everybody, there are 9 former bouncers. That was my old coach, my old team, as coaches. But we did that. Now, it was great. We had that. They had to come in twice a day. We were changing stuff as it went on. I mean, it was great, but I think the greatest part in the beginning part of training camp for me was seeing all the guys come back and watching this new blood get like hyped up for it, and now they're in it. So I mean, training camp was, that's the overview, the Coach H/Deion Sanders overview with it, right? And I like to say this because Deion says this. We look like a pit bull in pumps. All right, that's all I'm saying. A pit bull in pumps. We were doing it, and we were trying to get them better.
Coach, I love the LBR chain. I agree with you. The first thing I noticed with training camp, I got a chance to show up a couple days early, kind of by accident, and they were still putting the court together. And immediately you notice scoring bed's bigger, court is wider, right? Which you knew was going to have a pretty big impact on the game with not only how the stoppers get into the scoring bed to play defense and out, but how people attack that scoring bed offensively. And then the court being wider, I think that's something that we can all agree was like such a good move for SlamBall because it allowed it allowed the attacking angles to be better. It widened the floor, which made the game faster, passing easier, all that kind of stuff, which I thought was pretty cool. Had a chance to hang out a little bit with Stan Fletcher and Mason Gordon right before all the chaos started. And I agree with you, Coach. I think coming right out of the gates, the main takeaway was Stan Fletcher and Pat Graves. Like, two very valuable assets to SlamBall that we could not have gotten through training camp without. Stan and what he was doing out in China, coaching those Chinese players, it really showed and translated to this version of SlamBall. He did such a good job of, like, there was progression every single day with the players, and the drills were well thought out, and the days were well planned. And then having Pat Graves, I know you're going to have thoughts on this too, but it was the first time where you could really spend time on safety with SlamBall. And right. I know you're with me on this. Mason will kill us, but it's like going back to the olden days of SlamBall. I think safety comprised of, like, this is how you fall and you fell once, and this is how you try to land and you try to land. Now you have, Pat Graves, who's an aerial specialist out there, teaching the guys all the technique on, like, rolling their shoulders, making sure, they never land with their legs straight. All those types of things. And I think he had such a tremendous and positive impact on SlamBall, Coach, throughout the entire process, but definitely during training camp.
Yeah, and falling, right? And we're seeing in the NFL, Tua, my all-pro quarterback for the Miami Dolphins. I'm a Miami Dolphin fan, everybody. But he went to jiu-jitsu class this offseason to learn how to fall. So having our guys learn how to fall from a tramp, from up in the air and doing it. And I have to say this about Stan Fletcher, right? We coached many years ago SlamBall, and we knew these guys as players, right? So we saw them, we saw who they are, how they carried themselves. And I've said this from the beginning. I was so impressed with how Stan took control of everything and said, this is what we're going to do, right? And as a coach back in the day, you're like, man, I hope these guys are going to be all right, 20 years. And now fast forward 20 years, the plan, the execution was great. And let's talk about Pat Graves. Flip a day. I think that's his Instagram account. Flip a day. The dude is, like, jumping up. He's going all these things. But what I really loved about Pat Graves, if you ever watched him on his interview, he was like Ric Flair at the end of every dunk. He was always like, whoosh! I mean, it was Ric Flair in a younger man, smaller body, dunking on the SlamBall court.
Yeah, he was fantastic. I thought him and Coach Fletcher definitely brought those guys to the next level. And I thought what you saw was the improvement was so rapid, right? Like before you would see improvement, but it wasn't so rapid. I think we went from, hey, we're going to take our initial bounces on the scoring bed on day one. They were dunking on day two from the scoring bed. They were dunking from outside on day 4 or 5, which I thought was pretty awesome. I thought the progression was really good because you're really riding a fine line between pushing them hard enough where you have to get them ready in a certain amount of time, but also making sure that nobody gets injured. And I thought between Coach Fletcher and Coach Graves, it was a perfect marriage of being able to balance kind of that high wire act.
Yeah, and I think, when you have those two guys and then you pepper in Coach Jelani Janice, right? Trevor Anderson, James Willis. You've got Rob Wilson running everything, making sure that everything is going well from the top. And I'm missing tons of other coaches. They were all great. But watching them progress and now teaching the sport. And then the other part is, like, coaching is different than playing. Teaching is different than coaching and playing. So watching the teaching techniques, watching how they pull guys, I saw you, I know we're going to jump into the draft, but you and I were doing, like, pre-interviews, like talking to them, like, hey man, how's your family? Do you have a family? Do you have this? Like, why do you play? We're watching guys during film. Who's falling asleep during film and who's paying attention during film? All those things that you would do in a real sport, because SlamBall is a real sport, and having them, the players have that sort of understanding of that was huge. And we got to see who they are and who they were and who we wanted to draft.
Yeah. And training camp, it was super effective. I mean, I think we did a live scrimmage on day 5 with the Super 24 camp. And that was my early takeaway on how good these guys were going to be. I remember very specifically, I personally thought, I was like, I think it might be too early for a live scrimmage. But Stan was right on. He said they're ready. Like, we've gotten to the point where it's a full contact sport and they need to be able to experience that. And then we'll bring them back, scale them back again. And I thought it was perfect for timing for that. That's where I got my very first look at Darius Clark. That's
Yep.
where I saw him and I was like, wow, I didn't notice this guy too much prior. And during that scrimmage, he was fearless and just attacking from everywhere. He attacked from outside 3 or 4 times in a row. And I remember Dion Bailey, who was the assistant coach of the Lava, looked at me and he was like, this guy is such a dog. And I think a lot of coaches saw Dak for the first time and said, this guy's going to be really good. Saw a lot of players for the first time who they were really going to be. Bryce Morange, the same thing. Like he played so great. Tony Crosby, all those guys, Cam Horton, the guys that played great in those scrimmages, your guy, Ty Scott.
Mm-hmm.
And we got our first initial looks at kind of the building blocks for our teams there.
Right. And I think the other part too, where, I think outside, viewers watching SlamBall, right? We don't know. I mean, Dak Clark was a track superstar, right? We didn't know at the time how that skill set is going to transfer over, right? My stopper, Taekwon, only, I think, was there for 3 days, had a little nagging injury, and then we didn't know how good of a stopper he was going to be. I mean, there's so many countless guys, and that's why, like, when we, break down the draft, there were some guys who were like, maybe, maybe not. And then after a few weeks, you're like, oh, shoot, I think there's not necessarily, I think, one mold. Like, in the NFL or the NBA, this is exactly what we're looking for. In SlamBall, I still think it's up in the air. We may know what we like, but how are we going to teach and coach that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think too, one of the most memorable moments I had from training camp, because we did a lot of new things during training camp that we hadn't done before, is when they brought out the crash bags. I'm sure you remember that. And they brought out the crash bags and blew those up. And to be honest, my initial thought was, I'm not sure what this is going to do. And Stan and everybody was explaining like this is going to help the guys be more fearless in the air and try tricks and not be afraid to land. And the guy that I saw improve the most with the crash bags, Cam Horton, who I got to take a real good look at attacking from outside, but Alonzo Scott.
Mm-hmm.
There were so many guys that were able to attack fearlessly, maybe on day 4 or 5 when they pulled the crash bags out, that their attacking and their height and their fearlessness got so much better because they weren't afraid to land.
Yeah, and when coaches talk about the crash bags, there's a huge pad that would be would basically cover the island and the scoring tramp, the bottom tramp, and now our guys are going, and that's the same thing. I saw Raymond Taylor, who was my 8th round pick, who actually broke, or 7th round pick, broke his wrist, and I was like, oh, this guy, he was already high on my board, but now, you're showing the fearlessness with it, with him, with Cam, with Zoe, all the guys you're talking about. You're like, all right, but then the question became, wait a second. Is this becoming like a dunk contest? Is this pad being here only forcing them or making them think this is a dunk contest and not a real sport? And I think now we know that these are just different building blocks that is important to have to see what their potential could be.
Yep. And then I thought the one takeaway I would have from camp on the let's improve on this side would be, and I think you'll agree with me on this, it was hard to have the coaches coaching, but also be evaluating at the same time. That was super hard. And I know during the second week of camp, when it was the Super 24 and everybody else that we brought in, you and I both, I saw you do the same thing. We kind of took a step back and said, we're going to let some of the younger coaches do more of the coaching because we really need to be evaluating at this point. So I thought that was one of the challenges that we had during training.
Yeah. And it was a touch and feel, trying to figure out what exactly is the best formula. And I think you're right. As a coach, we got to evaluate. If we're going to really bring the best players to our team, evaluating talent is so huge in a sport that you don't have college film to go on. I know there are some other guys looking at film of other players and how they play and how they didn't play. And listen, film of what you did before may show your competitive nature, may show you going through a brick wall, but will it show exactly your effectiveness in SlamBall? No, it doesn't. And I think, my 2nd round pick, Michael, Kolawale was, has good basketball film, but there was questions like, hey, man, is that going to transfer SlamBall? And I'm telling you, he was phenomenal. And I'm sure you've had the same thing too. Yeah. You're watching tape, like you're watching a track film on Dak Clark. You're like, well, I think, and he was more than all right.
That's it. I think too, the one takeaway that I had on training camp on what can we improve upon was just if you remember we were playing with rules, right? We had some rules that we were messing around with. The court was a different setup. That was the biggest change from old slam ball to new slam ball. Is the island is half as wide. The angles on the island, because the pad structure is a little bit different. So those angles on the island and between the pads are like 45-degree angles now. And the scoring bed is so much bigger. So we didn't really know how that was going to impact the flow of the game. So when you throw those changes into the game and then you're in training camp and you're tweaking with the rules, but the one rule that I have to mention, and I know you know that I'm going to mention it, it was the bounce down rule, which I think we can all agree needed to be tweaked from the very beginning. Not that bouncing down isn't an important part of the game. I think we saw that it was, but we, for the first part of camp, mandated that players bounce down to get to the island. And that was tough to watch as a coach, because we were doing drills where you're bouncing down with no defender and you're taking 2 steps to do it. And that's not real game speed. Most guys are going a lot faster than that in a game, and they're being hit or about to be hit and trying to avoid somebody, where the bounce down becomes a lot harder to execute. So I definitely think where the league ended up with implementing the bounce down but not making it mandatory was the right thing to do. But I go back and think about how much time was wasted. Do we see so many teams and players bouncing down early on in the season constantly into the scoring bed if that's not as big a drilling point in training camp?
Yeah, I know. For those who don't know, Brendan Kirsch, when he puts his mind to something, the dude is relentless. Let me tell you, and he always does this, fans. I'm only going to say this one time. This is the last time I'm going to ever address this. That happened Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. It was the last time for that day. That's what I should have remembered. It's not the last time forever. It's the last time he's going to talk about it. And he talked about it a lot. But he was absolutely correct. He was absolutely correct. It made the game smoother. And we say bounce down is when you enter the tramp, you bounce the ball onto the tramp, so you pick up and then get it. Now, the other rule was you bounce down, the ball's got to go over your head, right? So now you need to super bounce and get it. So it's one of those things that it's so hard, right? Like, I'm glad they changed the rule, but it also helped develop some other skills as well too. And I think we're seeing that, we're looking at now from far, and we're saying, okay, that was some pretty good stuff. I think the thing is, what we also saw is who is fearless, right? Who is fearless? But I think what I didn't take into account is that you may not be fearless like after a week, but after 6 weeks, when we're playing our game on ESPN, and now there's some pride, and now my family's watching on TV, it's like, oh crap, you know what? I'm going for it. And you saw guys become fearless who I didn't think were going to be fearless, and all of a sudden, they're just scoring at will.
That's it too, because you bring up such a good point, because training camp is 2 weeks. And the first week was the Super 24 guys who were, I don't want to say handpicked, but they were scouted, and they knew that they would probably, all signs pointed to them to transitioning into this game at a very high level very easily. And then you had everybody else that came in behind them that weren't part of the Super 24, many of which ended up being some of the best players that we had in the league. Ty McGee was one of those players. So I remember we had that first week of training camp with the Super 24, and we were all saying, if we get the number 1 draft pick, Bryce Morange, like, that's our guy. That's who we're drafting. Ty McGee comes in on one day, and we're like, like Josh Carlson, when the Lava got the number 1 pick, he was thinking about taking Ty McGee after evaluating him for 48 hours. And Ty McGee was still like a baby bird. He wasn't quite used to the tramps yet, but you could see like that potential in them. And I think if all these guys get if we add 1 week of training camp, I think it's going to help so much from an evaluation standpoint and getting these guys all ramped up to where they need to be equally as we head into
and Josh Carlson, head coach of the Lava, right? So I lived with him. It was myself, Kevin Stapleton, Dion Bailey, Myrie Bowden. You were actually supposed to be in the house, but you brought your family. And I love your family. So I get it. But no, he was like, Josh would go on like a 2-mile run in the 120-degree heat, and see his 2-mile run, he gets that done in like 10 minutes. I do a 2-mile run. That takes like 4 hours. So in those 10 minutes, he'll come back and goes, I don't know. I think I may take Ty McGee. And I'm like, what? You're insane. mean? And his assistant, Dion Bailey, was like, Josh, what? You know, and but he saw something. We all saw something. But having the number one pick, that's hard because you're like, I really like Bryce. Bryce is man, he is sharp. He is explosive. But this Ty McGee guy, by the way, I want to give a shout out to Ty McGee because he's a proud graduate of Regis University. And there's also another person on this podcast, a proud graduate of Regis University, and that's me. So shout out to Regis and Ty McGee. I love you, but that's besides the point. But yeah, he was onto something, and it was, I mean, Ty McGee was pretty damn good. I'm just saying, he was pretty damn good.
Yeah, no doubt about that. And we talked a little bit. Okay, so I guess this is a good transition into draft preparation. Now, you kind of mentioned it here, Dion Bailey and Josh Carlson. What I kind of want to throw out there, unscheduled, is like assistant coach, head coach relationships. Like what stuck out to you there as we had, because assistant coaches were so critical as far as the draft preparation process. I just want to touch on this, but I want to give a shout out to Noah Ballou, my assistant coach. He'll be a head coach, I'm sure, moving forward. We joked all the time because he and I balanced each other out extremely well. You know, I worry about every little detail, making sure the little details are perfect, constantly worried about, like, we practiced together, coach. Those practice plans were down to the second, right? And I would worry about scouting and how we were going to play certain teams. And I mean, maybe overthink it here and there, as you would say. And I'd go to Noah and say, what do you think? And he'd look at me all calm, cool, and collected and be like, Coach, we're going to beat him by 40, Coach. Don't worry about
always
it.
Like that.
And it was the exact opposite of what, so I kind of needed that at times. So what assistant head coach pairing stuck out to you as kind of being either the funniest or the most
Well, first of all, Noah Ballou, if you guys ever just look at a picture of Noah Ballou, he looks like, and he actually wears a cowboy hat, but he looks like he should be wearing a cowboy hat every time. And I could see him saying that to you, like touching the brim of his hat and saying, Coach, we're going to blow everybody by 40. You know, like he has that like young Clint Eastwood type demeanor, with it. And he used to drive a Mitsubishi Diamante. Shout out to that car that I think is no more. But back to your question, I tell you, first of all, it's Sandy Fletcher. Sandy Fletcher, the most unassuming two-sport athlete ever, played football and basketball at USC. And for me, he was great because I'm always the one who looked like I was worried. And I was like, Coach, man, what are you so worried about? And he'd get on the guys and he would spend extra time. He was great. But I mean, you look at Jelani Janice and Ronnie Bond. First of all, those two guys was like a Marvel comic book hero, a duo because of how they looked in polo shirts. All right. I can lift no matter how much weight and I can't look entirely close to what those two look. Yeah. They're just like they got great posture and just like muscles all over the place. Right. So I thought that was a great pairing. Trevor Anderson, Gennaro Hemphill. Gennaro, another former bouncer, but like quiet, like Gennaro was such a caretaker. The dude brought liquid IV and orange slices to after practice. Like I was like, man, I really want one of these orange slices, but I can't ask them. That's taking away from them. I thought all the pairings were great, but I will say like Dion and Josh, both former players of mine. Again, I'm sorry, I'm patting myself on the back, but I'm saying Dion Bailey's fiery and Josh Carson's like a little more analytical. So you saw like people meshing and working together. I don't know if there was a bad mix of head and assistant coach, because ultimately the head coach is the head coach, the assistant coach, and we got to find a way to make it work just like any team. But it was just, again, great to see them become coaches and teach the place. Boy, I'm so sorry, man.
Well, you're not, Coach. You're bringing up good points. How about the Slashers, too? Think about their coaching staff, because Coach Stapleton got sick during preseason, and glad he's still with us, man, because that was scary there for a while, to be honest with you. Like we almost lost one of the good ones, but Coach Stapleton you had as an assistant coach, and Coach Fletcher as a head coach, and then Myrie Bowden, who probably could still play this game at a high level. That to me was one of the strongest coaching staffs.
Yeah, no, totally, because the mind of Kevin Stapleton, and I think what people don't either know or remember, Kevin Stapleton's first SlamBall team was not good. Like they were horrible because he was already running intricate style offenses back in the day. And then they brought it back with that backside lob and was doing great. And then you have Myrie Bowden, absolutely another roommate of mine, who could just take off at any moment. And then Stan, who is like, demonstrating to his team, throwing the ball up in the air, putting it between his legs, doing all this stuff. Meanwhile, I'm just coaching like, yeah, just jump, just jump, just do, and Stan is like showing him all the stuff, right? That is a dynamic coaching staff. And it was great watching his team get to that championship game, although a little upset that he beat my team, but that's another conversation, another time. But it was great watching him like build, and really find ways to win.
Yeah, having ex-players that played at such a high level is invaluable. Noah, I've told this story before, but Noah Ballou taught Cam Horton how to quick. And Cam Horton, Darius too, but Cam Horton was probably the fastest at the quick in the entire game. And he was taught by Noah Ballou. And it was so valuable for me to have that because I know the mechanics and the fundamentals of how to quick, but I can't quick. So it's hard for me not get to the rim. So it's hard for me to be able to explain that. So having Noah, it's so valuable. I'm so glad that we brought back ex-players as coaches because as SlamBall did before, there was a discussion, I know, and it wasn't with the front office. It was above that on like, hey, do we bring in celebrities? Do we bring in celebrities to help coach these teams? And I think Mason Gordon, in his defense, he kind of put his foot down and was like, if we want SlamBall to be what it is and where it needs to go as an organic game that needs to grow, we need the players who have played it and the coaches who have coached it to come back and do that. So kudos to the front office for putting their foot down on that. All right, Coach, we got sidetracked there on assistant coach, head coach duos. Let's talk about draft preparation, right? I know that when the audience picked us up, the teams were already formed, the draft had already happened, and the audience was just figuring out what the teams were. But let's talk about our draft prep as coaches during camp and how we approach the draft.
Yeah, well, I had Sandy. Sandy, my assistant coach, is tremendous. I call him like a slitherer, right? He just slithers through everything. He talks to everybody. He's like, hey, what's up? He's talking. He comes back. All of a sudden, I got intel. I'm like, oh, really? Okay. We're having this list. And the great thing about it, I'm not a huge thing on meetings. Like, we're either going to walk and talk or we're going to text. We see the same stuff, right? So why are we beating a dead horse? We're not doing this, right? So I would say, listen, man, you send me your list. I'll send you my list. And then I ended up doing, I went to the Daiso store. Daiso store is a great store. It's a Japanese store. I coach in Japan. So it's like these great Japanese little trinkets, but they had a whiteboard. I got some magnets. I printed everybody's name out. I wanted a draft board, and I wanted a draft board because this is the big time, right? You got to make the big time where you are. And I wanted a draft board. So we had everything set. We had all the different things in my mind. I even did a mock draft, saying, well, maybe he needs this, maybe. And then all of a sudden, in the middle of my mock draft, I said, this is pretty ridiculous. What am I doing with my life? Let me go make some food. And we had that. And then that was the process. And then, as you know, there are about 4 or 5 teams, not going to mention who came over to the draft board and wanted to see the Buzzsaw draft board. I'm just saying. But that was my process. Now Sandy, and again, Sandy was huge because he was doing interviews already from day one. And that was a big part for us to have.
Yeah, talking to the players during camp is huge. And I didn't see enough coaches doing it, honestly. Like when we were looking at stopper play, we targeted Gage Smith early on as a guy that potentially could play stopper at a high level. But we identified a number of players that we thought could also do that. But you have to have conversations with those guys because playing stopper, it's not like, hey, we want to put you back there because you can play it. Those dudes have to really want to play that position. So you'd have to have a conversation with them like, hey, how do you feel about playing stopper? And you could tell right off the bat whether they really wanted to or whether they didn't. So those little conversations, those side conversations were huge. Same thing happened with Cam Horton. We were talking to him about, hey, are you going to be comfortable being a distributor? Because if we draft you, it might be a situation where we're going to need to pass the ball more than do anything. And you could tell right away, it's not just the words in their answer. It's how they truly answer as people and the reactions to their answer. And you could tell right away, he not only was down for that, he embraced like what that role would be. So I think you're spot on. Those side conversations were huge. I think you're right about the assistant coaches playing such a pivotal role. We were so unfortunate, but it ended up being a blessing in disguise, is that Coach Blue got sick. He got super sick during the tail end of the first week of training camp. So as we headed into the second week, he had to quarantine for 5 days. So he was going to miss the entire second week of eval. And that's when all the new players came in. So we kind of broke it down, and we were, Coach, I got to give you a shout out for this too, because not the audience definitely doesn't know, but Coach Hernando took pictures of all the players and sent that list to all the coaches so that we could identify players by names, and we could easily and readily take notes on which players we like and which we didn't. So thank you, Coach H, for that. But Coach Ballou was quarantining, and he was evaluating the players that came in. I would send him notes after every day. He would do deep dive research on their social media platforms. He reached out to old coaches, people that on social that he ran across, and asked about some of these players, which I thought was so valuable, because there were guys, Coach, that we had on our draft board that we eliminated just based on some of the research that Coach Ballou had done. So just an interesting take on us only having one coach in that.
Yeah, and you know, the other part though too, and again, the draft, a SlamBall draft is not science, right? It's and I saw this on Twitter. Everybody's talking about like, oh, you know, how is Gage Smith not the #1 pick? It's really simple. It's because you just don't know at the time, right? You just don't know.
Yeah, hindsight's
You're just, I mean, let's talk.
It?
I know people talk about Gage Smith, but Gage, right? NAIA player, like middle of the country. You know, had some really nice moments, and you're just like, yeah, you know, I like him. Right. And then fast forward in the season, you're like, oh, what? You know, like, it's just like, you know, so everybody had who they wanted to draft. And I think that goes to your point. Coaching and evaluating is tougher, because I think there's some things, obviously, like you said, hindsight is 20/20. But when you look back, you're like, you know what? I wonder if that coach had spent more time evaluating instead of coaching or running a drill. Could they have made a different draft pick? I don't know, but those are like arguments you could talk about all the time.
Yeah, and I think to your point there, I hope that one of the things SlamBall does as we come back for the next season is to bring on coaches whose specific role is to take them through training camp. So we can do a lot of that evaluation, and coaches can get a closer look, because you're right. We can call them out by name. Trevor Anderson, Jelani Janice, Stan Fletcher, even though he didn't know he was going to be a head coach at the time, spent a lot of their time teaching. And kudos to them for doing that, but it took time away from the evaluation that they were able to do. Thankfully, their assistants were there and everything, but I agree with you on that point, Coach. And Gage, I mean, we've talked about it before. I mean, we knew he was going to be an incredible talent. He was already a solid gunner. If we had never played him at stopper, he was going to be a solid gunner. And we thought he could be a great stopper, but nobody, including us, knew how good a stopper he was really going to become. The best stoppers that we had, Kevin Cassidy, DeAndre Faison, if you look back at those great stoppers that played for us, we would run them through stopper drills all season long, and they would be improving. We got Gage through stopper drills for the first week, and he had already perfected every single one of them. And he was then, I would tell Coach Ballou, I'd say, go over and work on stopper drills with Gage. They'd work on that stuff for maybe 2 minutes. And then all he wanted to do was watch how the players were taking off, so he could try to remember their timing and things like that. So he evolved so quickly. It was one of those weird things in SlamBall. I know we call them artificial intelligence, but he truly was like, he only allowed something to beat him 1 or 2 times, and then he would adjust and never allow that thing to beat him again. And we saw that time and time again. But you can't predict those types of things in the draft. It's the same reason, you know, players who were drafted late in the NBA and the NFL become superstars. Tom Brady, you know, what was he drafted in the 7th round? And you can't 20. Yeah, hindsight is 20/20. You can't, there are signs that players are going to be really good, but no coach knows for sure.
And I will say one more thing I think about Gage Smith that is changing how I'm looking at players as well too, is how well they are in terms of the gratitude they have in life, right? One thing I learned about Gage is that literally he is always talking about how great the opportunity is and was, even during training camp. right? It's those things. And then he matched that gratitude with the intensity. And as soon as he got more comfortable, and that's a great lesson for any athlete. Like I hear talking to a lot of athletes, and they're always talking about the grind and how hard it is. Yeah, absolutely. But sometimes if you can flip that mindset a little bit, all of a sudden you're in that moment of gratitude with that intensity of you being a seasoned athlete. And now all of a sudden it can crescendo, which it did for Gage Smith, into a phenomenal season and hopefully a phenomenal career moving forward.
Now, for us, when we went through the draft eval process, we got Noah back. He didn't have to quarantine anymore. We were always looking to draft to our system. And I want you to follow up on this because I know the way that you draft too, having coached with you SlamBall for this many seasons, but we wanted to draft to our system. And we really had identified players that we knew we were going to take. We knew that we were taking Cam Horton in round 1, no matter what the pick was. It could have been 1 overall. It could have been 4. It could have been 8. We get our draft picks. The mob are in the 4th position. We're hoping that Cam Horton is there because we know our offense, if you have a good distributor, which is key in our offense, you're going to be able to run that offense. And then we knew we needed some wings and attackers and everything else. We did a mock draft the night before the draft, and we took Cam Horton in round 1. And we took, I forget who it was in round 2, maybe Ty McGee, something, because Darius Clark was going to be gone. We had assumed Darius Clark was going to be gone. And then we took, who was it, Gage Smith in round 3. So you look at those 3 rounds and play out, and it gets back to us. And now Darius Clark is still there. We had talked the night before. We said, what if Darius Clark is there coming back to us in round 2? And both of us were like, that's never going to happen. Like, he'll never last to back to us. Like, I hope that happens. So then we pick up Darius Clark in round 2, and then we're able to still grab Gage Smith in round 3. So I think we got very lucky in how the draft fell. And some of the other teams, Coach, took stoppers, as you know, early. Now, I know I want to hear you talk about your strategy because you have always been a head coach that has valued having one of the best stoppers in the game no matter what. And I know that's what you saw in Ty Scott. So talk a little bit about how
you drafted I think I really wanted a stopper from the beginning. And I think I did it the very first year, SlamBall season 1, I drafted Rob Wilson. SlamBall season 3, I drafted Rodney Bond. And then here again, I drafted a stopper. I just really believe that if you get one extra stop, and I know other people say, well, if you get one extra score, you could win. But I think I wanted to go with a stopper. And Taekwon, again, Sandy was the one who was like, Coach, I think we can go. Because it was Taekwon Debo, which I can't remember his real name right now. Christian Gray, and I was thinking a little bit Ty McGee, but I wasn't sold. And I was looking at stoppers down the line, and I said, let's go with Ty. So I got Ty, and then we had a snake draft, right? Which means if I drafted second, I'm not drafting again till 16 or 17, right? So there's all this gap. In the meantime, you had already drafted 2 guys. You had already Cam and Dak. And so now I was really pumped that Michael Kolawole was still there. He had size and length. And then I went with Jamal Barnes. And I'm going to tell you why I drafted Jamal Barnes in the 3rd pick. Jamal Barnes finished a dunk. And this is exactly what he said. He said, and I'm sorry, I'm about to cuss right now, but he said, I could be great at this sport. And I was like, I like this dude right here. Plus, I coach his dad, but I knew an intensity part of it. So I know we were the worst offense in SlamBall, statistically wise, but we were tremendous defensively, and it didn't pan out that way. Now, we had Raymond Taylor late, so we had guys coming in later on, and then we picked up a free agent handler who was amazing. So all those things, but I really want to say, hey, let's get a stopper. Someone I know who's going to be great in the beginning, and then let's build around them. And I thought we built okay.
Coach, you built great. You finished 3rd. You were in the semifinal game, had a great shot to go to the finals, and that was our goal. As we were we were strategic practice partners, right? We talked about it from day one. If you're strategic practice partners, your goal is let's finish 1-2, get the 1 and 2 seed, and then let's go to the finals and let the chips fall where they may.
But then we were so close to that. I dropped the ball in the semifinals and lost. Coach Stanley Fletcher.
Well, let's But
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
kudos to the slashers. They improved so dramatically. But let's talk
Mhm.
about Michael Kowale. Is
Kolawale.
it Kowale? How do
Kolawale.
you pronounce his
Yep.
last name? Kolawale. Okay, let's talk about Michael Kolawale because
Yep.
you drafted him second overall. Coach Ballou, he was pushing for us to potentially take him in the second
Hmm.
round before it got to you. He was an amazing talent. He was one of those guys in slam ball that you
Yeah.
could just tell had it all. Great kid, fearlessness, toughness, basketball skill set, great endurance. He was going to be fantastic, and then he ends up getting hurt in camp. I mean, if that doesn't happen, the buzzsaw will look a little bit differently than they did
Yeah, I think we
the
would have
season.
scored a couple more points with him. But I think the biggest part of losing Michael is that I believe he was the heartbeat of our team. And granted, when he went down,
Yeah.
other guys picked up the baton and were tremendous. But what Michael had was Michael was a coach on the floor. And when I would go in my crazy tangents all the time, he'd be like, "I got you, coach. I got you. I got you." You know, he would have players only meetings. He would be directing with that. And I'm telling you, this is the type of guy who he is as well, too. When he got injured, he stayed. He stayed at Slam Ball the whole time.
Mm-hmm.
Supporting, being at games, doing all the different things. And I really feel that we finished second overall in the league in regular season. You know, we got to the playoffs, and I think our gap would have been a little closer. I couldn't tell you. I think that's like a coach's wishful thinking, but losing him, you know. But then we picked up another handler who had a great year. This Ty Howard, he was Terrell Howard. He was great. I mean, he was great. So, you know, it's like next man up. And as everybody saw, I play everybody and I sub everybody. I do hockey changes to see how it goes. And I think for the most part, it did all right. But no, Michael is amazing. He's gonna have a great career, and I love that guy. Love him. Yeah,
I hope he comes back, Coach, for this season because
Yes.
he loved slam ball. That was the thing about it too. He loved it. He was so disappointed when he got injured. He absolutely loved the sport. So he's going to be a great player if he comes back and plays.
Yeah.
So I hope
he will.
does.
Damn it, I need him.
So to wrap up draft eval, we can just all agree that the mob absolutely dominated.
We can't argue that, everybody. We cannot argue that. So I'm not going to sit here and argue. I'm going to say for this season, absolutely.
We get to celebrate. We get to celebrate ourselves, Coach, for another 6 to 7 months before we have to worry about anything else. So we're really going to breathe that in. We're going to drink it like a fine wine, you know, celebrating our undefeated, historic, perfect season. And by the way, you might see my my posters in the background here. Got to get a shout out to Brittany Cherry, Darius Clark's girlfriend. I think Instagram socials, she is at Brit Design with a Z at the end, but she designed both of those posters. I think she did some graphic design work for SlamBall. They pulled her in and gave her a couple rubles, as SlamBall usually does, to do a lot of great work. We're familiar with that, but shout out to her and the mob. I mean, what can't they do? You know, John Shiffen said it best. Can anyone beat the mob? And we're still waiting. You know, technically, Coach, because we went undefeated in China.
Nope.
Both times. No. I'm totally wrong about that. So we'll just stick with our undefeated season this time, right?
You've got great art, and right now I'm super zen with my leaves. Out here, get a little fresh air. You know, because I walk around the house with the chain and the glasses on all the time, so I need the air. I need nature to come with it. You know what I'm saying? That's what I do.
Yeah, 100%. Rivalries, Coach. Rivalries. SlamBall has 8 teams. We all know that even though it's called the Buzzsaw, that's the new bouncers. They have 8 teams. We're talking about rivalries. What rivalries existed prior that maybe don't exist anymore? And what are the new rivalries that we saw emerge during SlamBall?
I have gone on record that there are no old rivalries. There just aren't. There just aren't, because it's hard to have a rivalry 16 years apart, right? Like it's just hard to have. The people are different. The generations are different. So that's my 2 cents, right? There's no rivalries. There's only new ones. And I'm telling you right now, slashers I think it's Slashers and Buzzsaw. The Mob aren't allowed to have a rivalry because they went 18-0. Okay, so there is no rivalry for the Mob. I don't hear it. Don't want to hear who you played. I mean, okay, maybe the Lava because you guys butt heads, whatever. But I'm saying it's the Slashers and maybe the Griffs. I mean, no, hold on. We can't forget. We cannot forget Team Ozone, or as I like to call them, Frozone. Against the Rat. Yes, Rat. That may be the marquee rivalry that I'm looking forward to seeing in the future.
Well, that one tops the list in SlamBall. Absolutely. Ozone Wrath. Are you kidding me? I mean, those guys fought during camp. They fought. We were on the court. For the audience that doesn't know this, we moved the court into Cox Pavilion where it was going to be. We're in the court. We're on day one of now practicing for the first time in like 4 days, and they're practice partners. And a fight breaks out there. Somebody gets their tooth knocked out. Punches are being thrown, have to be separated there. Then you fast forward to the games. Another fight potentially breaks out. I mean, that by far and away has to be the biggest rivalry in SlamBall. And you know, it dates back to it. Not everything dates back to the Mob, Coach. We know that, but a lot of things do. A lot of things do date back to the Mob. So we had Trevor Anderson playing for us back in the day, and we're playing in a heated rivalry game with the Riders, who were always one of our biggest rivals back then.
Yep.
And James Willis, who was the king of jump shots, tramp jumpers. He laid a dirty hit. Anybody can go back and look at it. A dirty hit on Sean Inches Jackson directly in his back. Trevor Anderson took exception. Hit James Willis. Bench is cleared. Xavier McDaniel's out there. The whole thing, like it never got repaired. That never got repaired, and it spilled over, which is crazy. 18 years later into
listen,
SlamBall.
That's what makes sports great too. The rivalries, the stories within it. Yeah. You know, that I agree. That is definitely a rivalry because that happened so many years ago, but it's also such you could see it on film. Like you see it on film over time and everything else, and it grows. But here's the one thing people aren't talking about. When they had the little fight during the game on ESPN, it's hard to have a fight in a tramp. Right? Like you're just bouncing up and down. You're trying to like say what? Like, cussing at it. Like you're cussing at each other, but you're like bouncing up and down. I mean, picture this. Like it's like you and I, we're bouncing up and down. I'm saying, you piece of, I'm going at, we're jumping up and down. I'm trying to throw a punch and like the punch is going higher because I'm jumping higher than everything else. Then I'm low, then I'm falling. And it's like, get to a ground. Let's get to a stable ground and let's make it happen. Yeah. But listen. I was not in that fight, so I'm very happy. I'm a lover, not a fighter, in the words of the immortal Michael Jackson. Right? So I don't condone fighting, by the way. I don't condone it. It's wrong, young people. It's wrong. It's a great rivalry. 100%.
Yeah, I'm glad I wasn't in that either because I like my paycheck more than I like fighting. But how about Mob Rumble? Is it still a rivalry? Because here's my experience with that. Coach Carter and I have coached those two teams. You were one of the original coaches, Coach Stapleton.
Yes.
It was a rivalry, no doubt. And a big part of that was because our players truly didn't like each other. They truly didn't. Like Chris Robbins and LaMonica Garrett did not like Whitney White and Jelani Janice and Deion Mays and James Willis and some of the guys that they had on their teams. Yep. They really didn't like each other. The Rumble came into our locker room at one point and a fight almost broke out. That's a true rivalry. I come back this time around. And first of all, Coach Carter and Coach White drafted a bunch of really good kids. Not that the old Rumble wasn't a bunch of really good kids, they were, but they were dogs that wanted to go out and fight in a junkyard. And these kids were like, they were just different. They were good kids. So I liked them so much. It was hard to even have a rivalry with the Rumble. And then you come out of the gates and we kick their by 50. Yep. How is that supposed to be a rivalry, Coach? You can't beat a team by 50.
Right. And I was in the stand saying, "Oh, this can't be good for TV." Oh, but again, that old Rumble team had Jelani Janice, the sheriff, right? And he just demands respect when he's walking in the room, or you just we're watching him just walking on a sidewalk, right? And he has that demeanor. And they had a bunch of guys who came together, and I think that's a mark of really true good teams. Is that it's the team that comes together. Us coaches, we're the architects. We're saying, hey, do this, this, this. But it's the teams that really come together and say, this is what we're going to do. That's what your team did. That's what my team did. Most of the time, I think they kept on trying, but that's what great teams do. This is what we're going to do. We're going to impose our will. And the Rumble did it back in the day because they would just come at you. They would drive. They would kick out, drive again. And Whitney White was so good. And you guys did it with this year. We're constantly, it's like air attack. Like you're just throwing, let's lob city with the mob. You should not be called the mob. You should be called the lob. That's what you guys should be called. All right? The lob with it, everything. And this brings us to another great point. You know, they talk about like fan favorites. Obviously, the mob is a fan favorite. Listen, the mob was geared to be fan favorite from the very beginning. The mob is a dope ass name. Let me just tell you, it's a dope ass name. Now, the second dope ass name is Bouncer in the Buzzsaw, but that's fine. But I'm saying, like, listen, you're already built in the revenue. I'm going to say this right now. SlamBall Management, the mob, or the lob, as I like to call them, you know, they should be getting royalties because that name is gold. That name is gold. Not as gold as this loose ball rebound chain with the best, but it's gold.
Well, you know what was golder than that was the Gordon Tolan Trophy. I held it real close to me. I kissed it at one point. It weighs like 85 pounds, and it is beautiful.
But where is it?
It's gold. I think it's in the SlamBall offices. Who knows? They just have to put our name on the trophy, and then it's like a perpetual trophy. You know, they just add the names. We got to spend like 30 minutes with it, and those memories will last a lifetime.
Remembers. By the way, you have to get mini trophies, like with the Emmys. You don't get the actual Emmy, right? You just get like, the mini ones. Yep. All right, rivalries. I had Slasher's Buzzsaw just like you. I had Ozone Wrath just like you. I had Griffin's Wrath because if you remember, those teams played each other pretty tough. Like those were some of the closest games that they had. And then I had Lava Mob. I know you say there's no rivalry, but the Lava got real good late. And to be completely honest, like there were a couple players in the Lava that I just flat out don't like. I think they're dirty as hell. And I told our guys that. I mean, you could clearly see on tape. It's like, and Josh Carlson, I love him. He's a good player, good head coach. But I would walk into the front office and he's sitting down with Rob Wilson, the EVP of player personnel, overseeing all the rules. And he's sitting there and he's like, well, I think, Coach, I think, Rob, I think this is right here. If you look at it, this might be like kind of a hit in the back or maybe it's what. And I'm like, are you kidding me? You had a guy elbow one of our guys in the back of the head and almost knock him out. I looked on film. It was so intentional. We had to pull the clip and send it to Rob to find the guy. Like 55 ticky-tack little potential fouls don't add up to egregious hits with intent to injure. And I think you can look at Lava Mob and see at least 4 or 5 egregious hits with intent to injure. Oh, by the way, when the game was completely out of hand, Lava just couldn't take their whooping like a man. They had to come out there and they had to just try to lay hits and injure and do all those types of things. And then we got to play them in the playoffs, Coach, and they had their crack at it and they couldn't get it done there either. So I say if there's any type of rivalry, mark us down for the Lava because that's one team I would love to beat their a few more times coming into the next season. Well, let me tell you something. You have just erupted a great rivalry right there. Thank you, everybody. My dad jokes are coming all day long.
I love it. All right. Well, Coach, like I said before, no matter what happens, they can't cancel us. So we're good. The 4-point line, Coach, we're moving on to subjects. The 4-point line. Should it be part of SlamBall? Was it a good idea? What are your overall thoughts on that? Now, Let me set the table for this, Coach, because the SlamBall front office and Mason Gordon, they really wanted there to be. Actually, I take that back. There was some discussion, I should say, over whether to have the 4-point line or not. I think the thought process was they're convinced that the NBA is going to have a 4-point line here in the very near future and start testing that with preseason and things of that nature. They wanted to have a 4-point line before the NBA does. Here's my problem with it, Coach. The SlamBall 4-point line is 26.5 feet. The NBA 3-point line is 23.9 feet. So we're talking about 2 feet farther. And oh, by the way, we don't have any Steph Curry out here playing SlamBall. You know, Richard Washington is as good a shooter as we're going to have in SlamBall. And I think he led the league. He shot 14. No, I'm sorry. He was 5 for 37. He was 5 for 37 from the 4-point line, and
Correct.
that was number 1 in the league. The league as a whole, coach, shot 14.5% from the 4-point line. So is it something that makes the game better? Should we leave it and just not take as many 4-point shots unless it's late in the shot clock? What are your thoughts on the 4-point?
If we really even break down even further, it was the Rumble who decided to take almost like 35-40% of the shots from the 4-point line. And I do remember when the 4-point line was introduced, I did joke I was going to play the first 3 weeks of us just shooting 84 pointers. And then during the playoffs, then we'll attack, right? There is a strategy involved with it if you have the people to do it, right? And then the other part is, how are you going to implement a 4-point shot within it, right? So I personally do love it. I don't love it if all of a sudden a team has 4 tremendous shooters and now they just start shooting it, because it's slam ball. It's not shoot ball. It's slam ball. Okay, so we got to get to the basket, and you could implement it. And I think over time the coaches are going to. I think the hesitation, though, of implementing a 4-point shot within the system is that the quarters are only 5 minutes long. So you don't have a whole lot of time for some of these guys to kind of get in the flow and then all of a sudden start stroking 4-point shots, right? So I think there's some things that have to be looked at philosophy-wise. Are we going to increase it to 6 to 7 minutes a quarter, and then now that could be implemented? I think those are some things that have to be discussed.
Yeah, and I think you make a good point. The playing devil's advocate to what I said before too is the stats don't always tell the story. The Rumble, you're right, they were shooting a lot of 4s, but part of their strategy was to sneak a guy in weak side for tip dunks. And so some of those 4s that were missed were actually capitalized on as 3s, cut with sending in a guy weak side for those tip dunks. So it's almost like we need a stat that's how many 4s were taken and then capitalized as 3s. I think that might be interesting to see. I'm fine with it being out there. You know, I don't think it doesn't impact us in any way, because we're only taking 4s if it's late in the shot clock or, you know, a situation like that. But, you know, to have the Rumble out there throwing up 4s the way that they did, it just wasn't, they'd go down, they'd shoot 4s, they'd go down significantly early, and then the only way they could dig out of it is continuing to shoot 4s. I think about, like, if there was no 4-point line, how good would the Rumble potentially have been, Coach? Like Kalen Tippin-Till, Richard Washington, all those guys that they had that were high flyers. If there was no 4-point line to lean back on and rely on, how good would they have been inside the slam zone? It would have been interesting to see, because you're right. Coach Carter and Coach White made 4-pointers a big part of their overall strategy and their draft strategy, Coach, because they drafted shooters.
I think, again, it's just going to be over time, right? Shooting is rhythm. Right, that's what it really is. So there's not a lot of time with 5 minutes, and yes, that exactly was their strategy. They want that weak side tip dunk, but there's also the other part. The argument can be made with these players have never played slam ball before, so we are trying to teach them to play a certain way in a short amount of time. And human nature tells us that we will do things that are comfortable, and shooting is comfortable for people. Shot making is not comfortable, but shooting is. And that's what a lot of teams did. And so you've got to, again, try and find something. It's whether it's coaches talking and say, hey, you know, this is where I don't want to do it. I mean, we would, I had a call when the shot clock was down to 0 or 2 to get that type of 4-point shot. Of course, I forgot to call it half the time, because we should never be in that situation to begin with. But yeah, no, I think there's situation things that are so important and got to be addressed.
Right. Well, for the audience who's watching this, let's just talk about why the 4-point line. Now, it's not just distance, right? It's if you're dribbling and you pull up for a 4-pointer, you can be completely obliterated. So you really have to catch and shoot if you want to get it up clean. Otherwise, you can be blown up, which your mindset is already thinking. The floor is spring-loaded. So when your legs are dead, which in slam ball, it's a very tiring game if the audience hasn't noticed. And when your legs are dead and you have a spring-loaded floor, you have to give it so much extra coming off to get it out and release it. You have to give it so much extra because the floor is absorbing your legs and your legs are already dead. Now, the advantage to the 4-point shot is probably that the rim is padded. there's a pool noodle around the rim and duct tape. So you would think that it has a little bit more give when it hits the rim. It can go in a little more flat than like an NBA rim does. But I still think it's a low percentage shot. And I understand why it exists. I do. And who am I to argue with SlamBall? But it just wasn't very effective. In fact, it was probably more of a detriment in this first season back.
Yeah, no, I could totally see it. And we started doing drills where you have to jump on the side tramp and then pop out, get your feet set to shoot it. Most teams were just running into it. And when you run into it, that's not a realistic part, because as you mentioned, there are 3 different types of floors or groundings or whatever on a SlamBall court. So your body mentally is getting ready for a spring floor, or coming off the screen, the tramp into the spring floor, right? Or the padding, right? So many things can affect shot making.
That's it. All right, Coach, last topic of the day, statistics. So we have some interesting statistics that I pulled. Some of these are actually on the SlamBall website. I'm trying to see the one. There was one interesting one, and I'll pull it up. I'll pull it up right now, where it basically talked about how SlamBall, out of all the professional sports, is the highest points per minute, which I thought was really, the bus definitely really not cool. In that mix. Especially with that younger audience wanting to see scoring. I'll pull up the exact stat here in a minute as you kind of go through some of the statistics, but I thought that was interesting. Okay, so the first one I have is, how about this? The record for points in a single game, Stan Fletcher held that back in the day. It was 42 points. It got broken twice this season. It got broken by Ty McGee, who scored 43 versus the Rumble. And then a couple weeks later, I think 2 or 3 weeks later, it was broken by Darius Clark, who scored 44 against the Griffs. So what are your thoughts on that? That's just scoring.
That's a lot of points in a SlamBall game. In a 20-minute SlamBall game, scoring, over 30, over 25, over 20 in a 20-minute game that you're not playing the full 20 minutes. That's so impressive. It's absolutely so impressive. That means you're efficient. That means you're attacking consistently. And that also, the third thing is that you're just blowing by the stopper every single time to do it. So, yeah, I mean, points is the name of the game. It's just like in any sport right now. And yeah, 44 points is an amazing feat. Ty McGee also had he also had over 40 points like that. Like, come on now.
43.
Come on.
Yeah. In a 20-minute game, Coach, in a 20-minute running clock game. I mean, it's hard to do anything in 20 minutes running clock 44 times. You know, it's crazy to be able to think that way, especially with as good as the stoppers got late. I'll tell you a story about that Griffs game where Darius Clark had his 44. First off, we had no idea. We had no idea how many points he had. And that game, we ended up jumping out to a really big lead, and the offense was running extremely well. It was one of the most effective games that we ever had running the offense. And I think we entered the fourth quarter and we had 80 points. We had 80 points. Wow. And I'm looking at the guys, one of their objectives for the year was to drop 100 in a game, which obviously has never been done before in SlamBall. And honestly, I didn't think it was even possible. I was like, it's not going to happen. Now, no, the Griffs didn't have their starting stopper. Matt Wilkerson, Connor had already been injured. He was out, and Matt Wilkerson had been injured. So they're playing a gunner at stopper. And we talked about in the huddle, we were like, should we go ahead and try to do this? And we agreed. We were like, we're not going to do it. This is not the right time. If you want to drop 100, that's fine. That's cool. But the other team has to at least have a starting stopper in, a legitimate starting stopper. So we break that huddle, and I look out, and Mason Gordon is doing, you might have been doing the play-by-play with Mason, but Mason Gordon's doing it, and he looks over at me, and he's like, you could score 100. And I'm like, Mace, we're not doing it. So we ended up slow playing the entire fourth quarter, and actually towards the end, even giving up shots and just letting the shot clock expire. And then after the game, I found out that I thought Darius Clark had missed the scoring.
Oh, that's right. I was doing you, Mason.
He had 42 and not 44. Yeah. And so I was like, oh my gosh, I feel so bad because I at least should have run something for him to be able to win that score, because he would have deserved to have done it in a whole nother quarter of play. But thankfully they went back and recorded it. And I think they had not counted one of his faceoffs or something like that. So he ended up with 44. So that was pretty awesome. All right, here, Coach, here's the stat. Points per minute SlamBall versus Major North American Sports League. SlamBall is 5.1 points per minute. The NBA is 4.7. Obviously, the other sports, because it's lower scoring, NFL 0.7, NHL 0.1, Major League Baseball 0.05 for anybody that still actually watches Major League Baseball. But SlamBall at 5.1, NBA at 4.7.
That is pretty cool. That means you're scoring above there. Although I have to say,
this year's buzzsaw definitely was not at 5 points per minute scoring. I just want to say that we are the anti-scoring SlamBall team. We were the worst SlamBall offense, but we were one of the top defenses, top 2. But enough patting myself in the back, because I'm the one who orchestrated the worst offense maybe in SlamBall history.
Coach, you don't give yourself enough credit. Your defense led to your offense. We all know that. Stop trying to sandbag. You're already trying to sandbag for next
it's all marketing.
season. Here it goes.
It is all marketing.
Coach, we're going to be at time. We're going to have to talk about some of these stats next time around. I think we're going to have episode 3.
Yep.
We're recording that next week if all things go well. And Coach, tell me this: are we planning? I think we're planning on we're going to start doing individual team in-depth analysis starting next week, where we pick one team every episode to dive into how that team did that season, coaches, players,
absolutely.
I mean,
we got to give, I think, good inside look on the teams, because I think, and the viewers and all you guys who are listening, what you see in SlamBall, you see the collision at the basket, but there's so much more that goes into it, from timing, from how you attacking the tramps, to how the coaches react, how the players react, who takes on the personality, who doesn't, right? All these different things that I think are going to be a big part of it.
That's right. We appreciate you guys. Who would have guessed we would have gone overtime, Coach? 2 chatty Cathys like us talking about SlamBall. Appreciate everybody. SlamBall Nation. This was season 1, episode 2. That's going to be a wrap.
We are.
Yeah, we're one take wonders, Coach.
You know why? Edit. Because in the words of
edit.
Deion Sanders, we work, we don't twerk. All right? We working, we are not twerking. I'm just saying that right now. That's what we do on SlamBall Nation.